what's so amazing about self-compassion that I love so much is that it can meet you at any step of the process that you're on. Say that you want to practice this, and then you go about your day and you feel like you mess something up or something's going wrong and you're berating yourself and you're going into over identification and you notice that. You're like, oh, I didn't even practice my self compassion. Amazing. Guess what we can meet that with? Compassion. Hello, welcome back to the Evergreen RX. I'm your host, Hayden, licensed mental health therapist, Cancer Moon, and the first to get deep at any party. And today we've got a special main dose, just me and you on the couch, gabbing about one of my favorite subjects, which is self compassion, which I think goes to show the kind of gabber I am that I'm saying that we're gabbing about self compassion. But if you have ever listened to a second of my podcast, you have most likely heard me talk about self compassion because I mention it in, I don't know, probably every episode. But that's because I think it is so foundational, personally and professionally. I think it is so foundational for our well being, for our mental wellness, for being able to create a life that we are able to live well, which is the whole point of this podcast, giving you those ingredients. And so I just couldn't believe that I haven't done a full episode on this yet. And I have got so much to say about it. So, what I want you to walk away from this episode with is an understanding of what self compassion is, which there are three kind of core components that make up self compassion. I want you to know how to practice it. And also, I'm going to talk a little bit about some myths or misconceptions that are commonly brought up around self compassion and also talk about the benefits of it. Because, oh my God, there's probably more benefits than I can even count. It's what I want to give you, this self compassion 101, and give you all the tools to really understand what I mean when I'm talking about this and how to put it into practice in your own life, because it has been so transformational in my own life. Last year, the beginning of 2024, one of my best friends told me that she wanted to read Self Compassion by Kristen Neff, which, for those of you that don't know, Kristen Neff is kind of the queen of self compassion. She's the big researcher on this topic. She's brought this practice into the mainstream and into the psychology field. Really amazing woman. And not to brag, but I did take a college course with her on self compassion because she teaches at UT, and I was very lucky to be able to take that course and learn from the master herself. So, maybe got a little bit of cred on why you could listen to me on this topic. But anyway, my best friend was like, I want to read this book. And I said, sure, I'll read it again. It's been a long time. And so, beginning of the year, last year, read self compassion, put the practices into place, did the exercises, and it changed my life. Like, hands down. Looking back on 2024, I went through so many personal changes. I cut my hair, I got a new car, I traveled, I went through some other hard personal difficulties. And hands down, self compassion was not only the biggest change, I think, in my life, but also helped me through everything else I went through in the past year. I think my year would have looked really different if I didn't have this awareness and knowledge and wasn't actively practicing being more compassionate and loving and gentle with myself. So, I also have the proof to prove it. I have scores, guys. On Kristen Neff's website, she has a self-compassion quiz that you can take, and it'll basically give you a score on how high you rank on practicing the three core components of self-compassion, and then how highly you rank on kind of practicing or doing the kind of core negative components, the opposite of self-compassion. And so I actually took that quiz before reading the book at the beginning of 2024. And then I took it again at the end of the year. And guys, it's crazy. I got the scores to prove it. I got the scores to show you how it works. So I will share those at the end, and hopefully that will be the extra little encouragement that you need to convince you why this is important. And maybe you don't even need convincing, you just want to know how to do it. But for those of you out there that are a little skeptical, I have the scores. So, self-compassion. What the fuck is it? As Kristen Neff has outlined, there are 3 pillars. It's like 3 legs on a stool. So it doesn't go in sequential order. One isn't more important than the other. They all come together to balance the stool. And these components are mindfulness, self-kindness, and common humanity. So, the other important thing to know before I dive into what these 3 components are made of and what they mean is that the basis of our understanding of suffering is that suffering is pain times resistance, comparing our reality to our ideals. So, what all of these 3 components work towards is to reduce our suffering. It doesn't take away our pain. It doesn't change the fact that life is hard. We actually become more aware and zen almost around the idea that there is pain, there is difficulty in life, and we are not alone with it, and that we deserve kindness in the things that we go through and what we struggle with. So, first component, mindfulness. Okay. So in the self-compassion frame, this means noticing a moment of suffering and turning towards our pain. We habitually have a tendency to turn away from pain, to constrict, to suppress, to ignore, to deny. We live in a pain-phobic society. And even though it's commonplace and we are going through moments of suffering often, small moments to large moments. So this first component is really just acknowledging a moment of suffering when it is occurring. The opposite of mindfulness is over-identification. So when we're in over-identification, we might be remaining kind of in the critical role or the observer role. And that's protective in a way, because when we're in that critical role, we are the one kind of admonishing ourselves for messing up or for something going wrong, instead of the one feeling the mistake, feeling the disappointment, feeling the sadness, feeling the grief. And so it's a way that we can kind of distance from actually being the one experiencing the pain. Mindfulness is also kind of our pause before going into problem solving. Most people are more comfortable in a fix-it role. We want to just make whatever is causing us problem to go away and just rush through it so that we can feel better, which is understandable, but it actually tends to cause us more problems and sometimes elongate our pain or turn it into suffering because of the resistance to what is happening in the moment and what our reality is. So, next component is self-kindness. This is what we probably typically think of when we think about self-compassion. This might be the one that some people bristle on, like, I'm going to be too soft with myself. I'm going to be too easy on myself. It's all hearts and rainbows and flowers and being mushy, and then I'm never going to get anything done. But really what self-kindness is truly is treating ourselves with care and understanding, self-soothing, talking to ourselves like we might talk to a friend, which means sometimes accountability, which can mean kind of lovingly holding ourselves to the standard that we would like to uphold. And knowing that we're not always going to hit the mark, and being able to support ourselves even in those moments so that our self-worth does not become contingent off of what we're able to achieve and the things that we do. Self-kindness is really cool because, like I said, Kristen Neff has done a lot of research and studies backing up the efficacy of the practice of self-compassion and of all 3 of these components. And one of the things that they found is with self-kindness, when we treat ourselves with more care, when we say supportive, phrases, that it actually helps to calm our nervous system and to activate our attachment system, which can turn the amygdala down. If anybody is familiar with parts of the brain, the amygdala is kind of the fear center, stress center, and it turns up oxytocin, which is the feel good hormone. So there are legitimate neurotransmitters that get released in our brain that change our biology when we are kind with ourselves. Self kindness is the opposite response to self judgment. So then we've got common humanity, which common humanity is probably the hardest to understand off of the bat, or maybe we just don't hear about it as much. But for me and for a lot of people that have been studied in practicing self compassion, this is the most influential, life changing component. Common humanity is our answer to isolation. That is its opposite. What this means is that when we are going through moments of suffering, we tend to think that something is happening that shouldn't be happening. Why is this happening to me? I feel alone in this. No one else has experienced what I'm experiencing right now. Something is going wrong. This is not how it should be. When common humanity, the antidote to this is acknowledging that suffering is a part of life. It's a part of the human condition. We all suffer, we all go through loss and pain, and we are not alone in it. So I actually have a personal experience that can speak to the impact of common humanity. As I said before, gone through some personal issues in 2024, and in a real time in my life, last summer when I was just really struggling and feeling a lot of loss and a lot of grief, I actually was listening to a book. I think I've mentioned this before. I was listening to this book, The Women by Kristen Neff, and it's about the women that were a part of the Vietnam War serving as nurses, and it really detailed the devastation of the war, the personal struggle of the main character. I mean, it was a pretty harrowing book. And it seems like a weird thing to listen to when I'm like really struggling myself, but it brought me so much comfort and so much perspective on wow, look at the things people have lived through. Wow, look at how resilient human beings are. Wow, look, I'm not alone in my pain. I remember having moments thinking like, I'd wake up in the morning and be like, how the fuck am I going to get through the day? And I would just think, I know for a fact there are other people in the world right now in this moment that are going through devastation and loss, that are struggling through their own things. And it would bring me so much comfort. And it seems weird, right? Because it's like we tend to think like don't compare suffering and don't, oh, people have it worse. So, I shouldn't be sad. But that's not what common humanity is at all. It was, wow, I feel so much support in knowing that I'm not the only one that suffers, that this is a part of the human experience that people have dealt with, and survived through so much, and I will get through this. And I just had distinct moments where it brought me so much comfort and support. And, the self kindness and the mindfulness were also on board. But when I would bring in that perspective, and understanding of the human experience, just totally stepped me back and brought me into a place of strength and resiliency, that even if I felt like I didn't have as much of my own to lean on, I could lean on other people's, or, stories like the book I was reading to kind of borrow from that and borrow that strength when I really needed it. Okay, so those are our 3 ingredients: mindfulness, self kindness, common humanity. Antidotes to over identification, self judgment, and isolation. Already listing those three things out, how much nicer and lighter and more hopeful do the components of self compassion feel than when we talk about their opposites? Which really, when we haven't been taught these things and we're just kind of on autopilot, especially with our self talk, most of us are falling into the camp of the kind of three negative components. And listen how heavy that is. Isolation, self-judgment, over-identification. That's what we're dealing with when we're going through a moment of pain. So no wonder it becomes suffering and it sticks and it stays in our body, and we get into these perpetual places of tension and holding. We're guarding and strengthening ourselves against our own criticism and our own layers of difficulty that we add on top of whatever we're going through. So, by this point, you might be thinking about a couple of rebuttals to this idea. Maybe some of your own kind of hesitancy is coming up. So, I do want to talk about some common myths or misconceptions that can come up. One is that it kills motivation. So we tend to think that we need the inner drill sergeant and critic to keep us going, to make sure that we're not just lazy slobs that lay on the couch all day and never go to work. But actually, in the research, it's been found that being more compassionate with ourselves actually reduces our fear of failure and makes us more resilient in the face of challenges. We feel the energy, the motivation, and excitement to try new things because we're not so afraid of the barrage of criticism that we'll give ourselves if we fall short, if we make a misstep. It allows us to be freer in pursuing our dreams and our aspirations and the things that we need to do in our life. Some other misconceptions are that it's weak or selfish, but actually, self compassion has been shown to make people more emotionally intelligent and have the ability to be there for others more often. Because when we have the practice of being there for ourselves, which is quite possibly the hardest person to be there for, then we have more of an ability to show up for others and to provide that kindness for others because we are not judging ourselves so harshly. You know, people talk about how our relationship to others is a mirror to ourselves. So if we are constantly berating ourselves, then it can be challenging to give the kindness and compassion to other people. So, how do we practice? How can you start practicing right now, today? Because you can always start today. And actually, what's so amazing about self compassion that I love so much is that it can meet you at any step of the process that you're on. Say that you want to practice this, and then you go about your day and you feel like you mess something up or something's going wrong, and you're berating yourself and you're going into over identification, and you notice that. You're like, oh, I didn't even practice my self compassion. Amazing. Guess what we can meet that with? Compassion. That is, I think, one of the most impactful parts of this practice is that any layer you're on, any moment where you catch, oh, okay, wow, I'm really beating myself up right now, is the moment that we can bring in compassion. Oh, I know you really wanted to practice this. And in this last, 5 minutes, that hasn't happened. Oh, okay, ouch, that hurts. Can we try to say something new? Any point that you're at, you can always bring in this practice. It's never too late. You never missed the boat on being compassionate with yourself in any given moment. So, a couple ways to practice it are things like challenging your negative self-talk. This takes some kind of awareness, again, that mindfulness on what the voice inside of our head sounds like, what it's saying to us in any given moment, and how it feels. You can even just check in with your body, like, when I say this phrase, oh, I'm such a fuck up, I'll never get anything right. How does that feel? Do I feel heavy? What's my posture like? And can I think of a phrase that feels slightly better? Can I think of something that I might say to a friend or to a child? And can I practice that? Even if it feels a little foreign, even if it feels kind of funny or cringy or silly or you don't totally believe it, can you practice it anyway and see, does it feel lighter in your body? taking time to journal, it can help to write out reframes. Like maybe you can write out all the statements you're saying to yourself, and then on the next page, kind of write out ways that you could reframe it. Physical comfort and soothing. This is a big thing. You might have seen me if you're watching the podcast, put a hand on my heart earlier. That's a big thing for me is, you can put your hand on your heart. You can give yourself a little hug. You can pat your legs or rub them. You can rub your hands together. It doesn't have to be anything huge, but something that is physically soothing, again, kind of helps put our body into that more relaxed parasympathetic state, which is very helpful in moments of suffering because, like I've talked about in previous episodes, I think in my episode on, how to find joy in hard times is when we're able to practice things like that and soothe our nervous system, then our perspective widens and our system calms where we're able to make more effective choices. Also, speaking out loud to yourself, it's a little bit harder usually to be so judgmental when you're saying it out loud because you're like, damn, this actually sounds pretty mean. So that's a way to practice. Also, meditation. This is really helpful in terms of just building that awareness, that internal awareness, and being able to break those habitual patterns. So I have a whole episode, I think it's episode 3 of my podcast, Microdosing Mindfulness, if you want to know a little bit more about, meditation and bringing that awareness practice in. But those are some ways that we can start to, utilize these 3 legs of the chair, this self-compassion practice. And also, there's a wonderful statement that Kristen Neff shares. This is in her book, and it kind of just encapsulates all of these components. So if you have really no idea where to start and it would be helpful to just memorize something and practice that, here is your statement. Okay, so this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I give myself the compassion I need. And if you want to get the extra credit, you can practice it hand on heart. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I give myself the compassion I need. And also, just so you guys know, there's a ton of resources online. I'm going to share a couple resources with you at the end of this too. But you can always look up, like, what do some phrases sound like? What are some, self-kindness phrases? And get inspiration that way if you're really struggling to come up with things. Okay, so let's get to my scores. Let's get to the proof. So this self-compassion quiz, which I will have linked below, is on a scale from 1 to 5. And so on the components of the kind of positive, the 3 pillars, a higher score is better. On their opposites, their negatives, a lower score is better. Makes sense, right? Okay, so when I took this at the beginning of 2024, self-kindness, I got a 3.6. Not too bad, probably because I already took the class in college. But when I took it again in 2025, I got a 4.4 on self-kindness. So quite the increase. Common humanity, I scored a 3.25 in 2024, and I scored a 4.5 in 2025. Mindfulness, I got a 3.5, and when I took it again a year later, I got a 4.5. So every single dimension went up a point or more over a year. Almost all of them were 4.5, which is 0.5 away from the highest score, which is pretty miraculous if you ask me. And then on the negative components, so self-judgment, I got a 3.8, so pretty high on self-judgment. A year later, I got a 2.4, so over a 1-point decrease. Isolation, I got a 3.75. A year later, I got a 3. And over-identification, 3.5. A year later, 2.75. So all of the kind of negative components also went down drastically. So it's not just that I was becoming more self-compassionate with myself, but also that I was becoming less judgmental and critical and hard on myself. I was creating less suffering. Thus, the compassion I was able to bring on is probably even more effective because I'm also creating less suffering to begin with. So, my overall score in 2024, my average of all of this was a 2.88 out of 5. Next year, 3.88 out of 5. So, I went up a whole point just over the course of a year, and a year that involved a lot of hardship for me. And I just think that that is so amazing. And I love having kind of the proof right there because I can feel it too. I feel more resilient. I feel stronger. I feel more conscious and aware of my relationship to myself. And I've seen how that ripples out into every other aspect of my life, into the way that I'm able to pursue my goals, into my relationships with others, the way that I show up making a podcast and putting myself online. I have so much more respect for myself. I have so much more pride for what I've accomplished. Okay, so there it is. There's the whole enchilada. Hopefully it makes sense to you. But like I said, I'm going to share resources with you. So I got quite a few resources. All of these are going to be linked in the show notes below. And also on my website, you can find all the resources. But there's a couple of things I want to share with you. One, the self-compassion quiz, just so you can get an idea of your baseline. Two, there is a really wonderful video of Kristen Neff explaining the components of self-compassion. It's only 6 minutes. So if you want like a quick little reminder, if you want to hear it coming from the horse's mouth itself, it's there. I think she has a really wonderful way of explaining things. Also, like I mentioned, Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. She also has a ton of other books. So I'm going to link her website so you can find all of her resources. I also thought there was a really good video by Tori Olds, which is this woman on YouTube, and she talks about the common myths and misconceptions of self-compassion and goes through and kind of busts all of them. So if you really want some more detail on that, I'll link that video below. And I'm also going to have a little image on my website for you where it just kind of quickly shows each core component and a little definition. So you can print it off or save it on your phone, have it somewhere where you can see it to really keep these things top of mind. So I hope all of those things help you and kind of carry you out from this episode so that you can lay this foundation for yourself too, because I'm not being dramatic when I tell you how important this practice is. And if you follow any other therapist or therapist-y adjacent people online, probably heard them talk about self-compassion too, because it's an amazing gift that we're able to give ourselves. And I would love to hear how this practice goes for you, or send me your before and after scores. And let's just keep growing on this with each other. So thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I'm so grateful to this community that I'm building. And if you think that this would help anybody else, please share the episode. That means so much to me. Give me a little 5-star rating if you've got a second. And until the next time, I wish you the best.